The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the motel parking lot in faint streaks of orange and gray. Most guests were still asleep, but the sound of a car door shutting softly broke the silence. A young boy clutched a worn teddy bear tightly against his chest as he walked beside his mother. She moved quickly, her eyes darting nervously across the lot as though she feared someone was watching. There was no cheerful, "Good morning," to the front desk clerk, no small talk, no request for directions. Just a hurried pace, a bowed head, and the quiet rustle of the boy's sneakers against the gravel. The mother's hand trembled slightly as she guided her son to their car. She didn't carry any luggage, no extra bags, not even the motel room key that guests were expected to return. It was as if she wanted to erase any trace of their stay, leaving the room behind like a sealed secret. The boy glanced up at her, his wide eyes filled with questions he didn't dare speak aloud. His teddy bear hung by its arm, dangling like a silent witness to something unspoken. The clerk at the front desk, half asleep over a newspaper, barely registered their departure. He thought it strange they didn't check out, but fatigue made him shrug it off. It was the maid, however, who noticed everything. From the hallway window, she caught sight of the mother's pale face, and the boy's slow steps, each one reluctant, hesitant, as though leaving wasn't relief but a necessity. Something about their exit gnawed at her instincts, a quiet alarm bell that wouldn't stop ringing in the back of her mind. The boy lingered for just a moment before climbing into the car, turning his head toward the row of motel rooms. His gaze stopped on the very door they had just left. Room 6. There was a strange sadness in his eyes, almost as if he was leaving something important behind. He hugged the teddy closer, his small fingers gripping it until his knuckles turned white. The mother noticed and tugged him quickly into the seat, shutting the door with more force than she intended. The engine coughed to life, breaking the fragile quiet of the morning. Without so much as a glance in the rearview mirror, the mother pulled out of the parking lot. Tires crunched against gravel, dust rose in the air, and in seconds, the car vanished onto the highway. For most, it would have seemed like any other family leaving after a night's stay. But to the maid, who still stood frozen in the hallway with her cleaning cart, there was something haunting in the way they left. Like a story half finished, a door left half open, and a secret still trapped inside room 6. The maid had been working at the motel for nearly 15 years, long enough to know that every guest left behind traces of their stay, crumbled receipts, half-finished snacks, or at least a key dropped lazily at the front desk. But when she rolled her cleaning cart past room 6, she noticed none of those things. The door was shut, the key still missing, and a cold hush seemed to linger in the air around it. She paused, her hand resting on the handle of her cart, her eyes narrowing at the door like it held an untold story. There was no logical reason for her unease, yet her chest felt heavy, like a warning pressing down on her lungs. Years of routine had sharpened her instincts. She had learned to sense when something was off in a room, when a guest had left in anger, or when trouble had brewed behind closed doors. But this was different. It wasn't just disorder she expected, it was dread. The silence behind that door wasn't normal, it felt alive, waiting, almost pulling her closer. She leaned slightly forward, listening. Usually, after guests left, there would be faint signs of life, the hum of a bathroom fan left on, the drip of a leaky faucet, or even the shuffle of forgotten belongings being dragged out. But room 6 was unnervingly still. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating, as though the air inside had been sealed tight, unwilling to escape. The longer she stared at the door, the more she felt that familiar, gnawing tug in her stomach. Something wasn't right. Her fingers itched with hesitation as she reached for the spare key clipped to her belt. It was against protocol to enter without clearance, but her curiosity, no, her instinct, was stronger. She told herself she was only doing her job, that she was making sure the guests hadn't skipped out on payment, or left a mess that would delay her schedule. Still, deep down, she knew her reason was more primal. It wasn't duty guiding her hand toward the lock. It was fear mixed with the need to uncover it. As she stood there, torn between stepping inside and walking away, a strange chill brushed across her neck, sending goosebumps racing up her arms. She shivered, even though the hallway was warm. The air seemed to thicken, as though the motel itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't about cleaning a room. It was about discovering what that mother and boy had left behind, and why she couldn't shake the feeling that room 6 wasn't truly empty at all. When the maid finally slipped the key into the lock and turned it, the door opened with a faint creak that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. She pushed it open cautiously, letting the faint morning light spill into the room. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly normal. Too normal. The bedspreads were smoothed out, The curtains were drawn neatly, and there wasn't a single item left behind to suggest anyone had even stayed there. Yet that was what made her chest tighten. Guests rarely left rooms in such pristine condition, especially guests who left in such a hurry. She stepped inside, and immediately, the air felt different. It wasn't warm or welcoming, it was heavy, stale, and almost suffocating, as though the room hadn't been touched in years. She closed the door behind her, and the silence that followed was unnerving. No buzzing of an air conditioner, no faint hum of a refrigerator, not even the distant sounds of cars passing on the highway. Just silence, so thick that her own breathing sounded too loud. It was the kind of silence that pressed against her ears, making her heartbeat echo louder than it should. Her eyes scanned the space again, this time more carefully. The desk lamp was unplugged, the chairs perfectly aligned, the trash can completely empty. It wasn't just clean, it was staged, almost unnatural, as if someone had deliberately wiped away every trace of life. And yet, her instincts screamed that the room wasn't truly empty. Her gaze fell on one of the beds, the one nearest the window. The comforter looked untouched, but the mattress beneath had the faintest indentation, a small dip, like someone had been lying there not long ago. She moved closer, her shoes muffled against the carpet. The closer she got to the bed, the stronger the sensation became. The feeling that she wasn't alone. It wasn't something she could explain logically. It was in the air, in the weight of the silence, in the faint shift of shadows along the wall. Her throat felt dry, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw the comforter twitch, ever so slightly, as though something beneath it had moved. She blinked, and it was still again. Her hand hovered near the bedpost, her body frozen between instinct and fear. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she was imagining things, that her nerves were playing tricks. But the silence didn't ease her, it only deepened the dread. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty motel room. It was the waiting silence of something unseen, something lingering, something that wanted her to notice. The maid forced herself to move deeper into the room, her cart still standing just outside the door as if it, too, was unwilling to enter. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary, but her trained eyes began to notice the details. She bent down near the dresser to check for dust, and that's when she saw it. A single child's shoe tucked awkwardly against the leg of the furniture. It wasn't hidden intentionally, more like it had been kicked there in a hurry. She reached down to pick it up, but the thought of touching it made her fingers hesitate. Something about that little shoe felt wrong, as though it belonged to a child who had left unwillingly. Her gaze shifted to the nightstand, where a half-filled glass of water sat untouched. She leaned closer, and a chill rippled through her when she noticed beads of condensation, still sliding down its side. That meant the water was fresh. Someone had been drinking from it within the last hour, maybe even minutes before she entered. Yet, the boy and his mother had left at sunrise, nearly half an hour ago. Her stomach tightened. Had they really left alone? Or had someone else been here with them? She swallowed hard and turned toward the wall, only to notice faint scratches etched into the pale paint, barely visible unless the light struck them at the right angle. She ran her fingers over them. Thin, desperate lines, unevenly carved as though made by fingernails instead of a tool. The longer she looked, the more it seemed less like random marks, and more like frantic attempts to communicate. Her throat went dry, and her hand trembled as she traced the uneven grooves. She could almost imagine someone clawing at the wall, silently begging to be noticed. The maid backed away, her pulse hammering in her ears, when something else caught her attention. On the carpet near the edge of the bed, the faintest outline of a stain was visible, a patch slightly darker than the rest, barely noticeable unless you were searching. She crouched down, brushing her fingertips lightly over the fibers. The smell that lingered there made her flinch. It wasn't the smell of spilled coffee or soda. It was metallic, sharp, something she instantly recognized, but didn't want to admit to herself: the scent of dried blood. Her chest tightened as she rose slowly to her feet. Each clue stacked upon the last, weaving a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. A child's abandoned shoe. A fresh glass of water. Scratches carved desperately into a wall. A stain that whispered of violence. And yet, everything else in the room was staged to appear untouched. It was as if someone had tried to bury a nightmare beneath a mask of normalcy, but the fragments of truth kept bleeding through. And standing in the center of room 6, she realized that she hadn't just stumbled upon forgotten belongings. She had stepped into the middle of a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. The maid's eyes kept drifting back to the bed nearest the window. Even after spotting the clues scattered around the room, her instincts told her that the real answer, or the real danger, was hiding beneath those neatly tucked sheets. The comforter looked too perfect, too carefully smoothed over, as if someone had gone out of their way to conceal what lay underneath. She tried to look away, to distract herself by adjusting the curtains, or checking the closet, but her gaze was pulled back again and again, drawn by something she couldn't explain. Her feet felt heavier with each step as she approached the bed. The air grew colder near it, and she noticed how the silence seemed denser in that corner of the room. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, unnaturally loud, like it was mocking her hesitation. She reached the edge of the mattress and placed her hand on the bedpost, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady herself. The bulge under the sheets was subtle but undeniable, a faint rise and fall that looked eerily like the shape of a body. Her breath quickened. Logic screamed that it could be nothing more than extra blankets, or maybe luggage stuffed underneath. But her heart knew better. She could feel the tension in the room, like a secret pressing against the walls, waiting to be exposed. She bent slightly, staring harder at the uneven outline beneath the fabric. The curve of it was too smooth, too natural. The longer she stared, the more certain she became that it wasn't luggage at all. It was something alive, or something that once had been. She reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers hovering just above the blanket. A part of her wanted to rip it away quickly, to tear off the bandage and see the truth all at once. Another part of her begged her to turn around, to leave the room, to forget the shoe, the water, the scratches, and the stain. The weight of the silence pressed harder now, her every breath echoing back at her as though the room itself was waiting for her decision. Her hand shook, suspended in the air, as if the sheet was daring her to uncover it. The maid swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "Just blankets, it's just blankets." But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. Something deep inside her told her that once she pulled back the sheet, nothing in her life, or in this motel, would ever feel the same again. With a trembling breath, the maid finally gripped the corner of the sheet. For a moment, she hesitated, frozen in place, her mind begging her to stop. But the weight of the silence, the suffocating air, and the gnawing pull of curiosity pushed her onward. Inch by inch, she lifted the blanket, the fabric whispering against itself in the stillness of the room. At first, all she saw was the smooth curve of the mattress, but then, her heart stopped. A pale hand emerged from beneath the cover, limp and cold, its fingers curled slightly as if frozen mid-motion. She stumbled backward, her own hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The sheet slipped further as she fell against the dresser, revealing more of what was hidden. A face, white, expressionless, eyes closed as if in eternal sleep, lay beneath the fabric. It was the face of a young woman, her features delicate but lifeless, framed by dark strands of hair matted against the pillow. The maid's stomach lurched violently, bile rising to her throat, as her mind scrambled to process what she was seeing. The body had been carefully arranged, almost reverently, as though someone wanted her to look peaceful. But the details betrayed the illusion. There was a faint discoloration along the woman's neck, a bruising that told of struggle rather than rest. The maid's gaze darted to the hands again and noticed the fingernails, broken, jagged, with small traces of blood underneath. Her chest tightened as she realized the scratches on the wall hadn't been random marks after all. They were desperate attempts at escape. The maid's knees buckled, and she sank against the edge of the bed, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She wanted to look away, to shut her eyes and pretend this wasn't real, but her gaze was locked onto the lifeless figure before her. The teddy bear, the shoe, the stains, all the fragments of the puzzle began to fit together in her mind, but the picture it formed was one she wasn't ready to see. The woman hadn't died peacefully. She had been left here, hidden, abandoned, and silenced beneath carefully folded sheets. The silence of the room seemed louder now, pressing against her ears like a scream she couldn't hear. The maid clutched the side of the mattress, shaking, her mind racing with a single thought that chilled her to the bone. If this body had been left here so deliberately, then whoever had placed it under the sheets might not be far away. The maid bolted upright, stumbling toward the door in a frenzy. Her throat burned as she screamed for the manager, her words sharp and panicked, echoing through the thin hallway walls. Within moments, the manager rushed down the corridor, his face twisted in confusion as she pulled him inside. Her hands shook violently as she pointed toward the bed, her voice trembling as she tried to explain what she had seen. "There's a body. Under the sheets, a woman. She's there." Her words came out in gasps, each one edged with terror. The manager hurried forward, skepticism on his face, but when he ripped back the blanket, the maid's heart nearly stopped. The bed was empty, perfectly made. The sheets lay smooth and undisturbed, tucked tightly at the corners, as if no one had touched them in days. The indentation in the mattress was gone, the faint outline erased. Even the smell, the metallic tang that had clung to the air, had vanished. It was as if the body had never been there at all. No, I saw her, the maid cried, grabbing at the sheets, pulling them apart desperately. But there was nothing, no trace of hair, no pale hand, no bruised skin. The glass of water on the nightstand was gone, too, as if it had never existed. She dropped to her knees, frantically searching under the bed, yanking open drawers, scanning the corners of the room. Nothing. Every clue that had chilled her moments ago, the shoe, the scratches, the stain, had disappeared. The room was spotless, impossibly pristine. The manager's face darkened, irritation replacing concern. "You've been working too many hours," he muttered, trying to brush it off as exhaustion, or an overactive imagination. But the maid's trembling hands and wide, tear-filled eyes told a different story. She clutched at his sleeve, begging him to believe her, but his expression made it clear. He hadn't seen anything, and to him there was nothing to see. To him, the room was empty. Yet, as the maid stood frozen in the doorway, something caught her attention. A faint whisper, too soft for the manager to notice, drifting through the air like a sigh. It came from the bed, from beneath the perfectly smoothed sheets. Her heart pounded as her ears strained to listen. The sound was fleeting, fragile, but unmistakable. It was a woman's voice, and it was still there. The maid never returned to room 6 after that day. She quit the motel within a week, her resignation sudden and unexplained. The manager told the staff she had lost her nerves. But those who worked beside her noticed how her hands trembled whenever the subject came up, how her eyes avoided the hallway that led to that room. Room 6 remained on the books, but strangely, no guests ever seemed to stay there for long. Some checked out in the middle of the night, without asking for refunds. Others complained of whispers in the walls, shadows moving across the curtains, and the crushing weight of silence that made them feel as though they weren't alone. As for the boy and his mother, no one ever saw them again. Their names weren't on the motel registry, no credit card, no license plate number. It was as if they had never existed at all. To this day, employees at the motel avoid room 6 whenever they can. The sheets are always tucked perfectly smooth in the morning, no matter how they were left the night before. And if you stand in the silence long enough, you might hear it too. The faint whisper of a woman's voice, calling out from beneath the covers, waiting to be found again.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.